Hi, hey everybody. Just want to say something up front and then happy to take your questions. I just was an honor to speak to the convention. What I focused on was an issue that I think has to be one of the key things we talk about going forward in this campaign, because I'm talking about an issue like automation. This is going to affect not millions, tens of millions of American workers here in New Hampshire and all over this country. And I want to make it very clear what it means for people. There are folks right now all over this country, millions of Americans, who don't know if their job is going to be there next year. We're talking about a fear, an insecurity that is very, very deep right now. We've already lost millions of Americans' jobs to automation just over the last years, but here's one estimate from the Brookings Institution that by 2030, as many as 36 million jobs may be imperiled. It's a staggering figure. Doesn't resemble anything we've been through before. So I'm talking about automation because it needs to be put front and center in this election. But I have to be blunt about the fact that there's a real absence of dialogue and a real absence of ideas, and I think it's directly related to the fact that too many candidates who are uncomfortable raising these issues. A lot of their donors don't want them raised. A lot of folks in Silicon Valley don't want these issues raised. But we got to do it. We got to do it on behalf of working Americans. Now, I give Andrew Yang credit that he has talked about the issue, and I respect him, but I disagree with the solution he's put forward. He's talked about universal basic income. Universal basic income might be a part of a solution, but it's not a solution itself. The reason is this. There's just not enough money. There's not going to be enough money to pay for it on a big scale. It's not going to give enough money to working families, and there's too much danger of a future without work. And we have to come to grips with this. There are some people who say, hey, what if millions and millions of people just don't work anymore? I think that's a very dangerous future for this country. I think it's a dangerous future for our social fabric. I think that would mean many people who felt their lives were not full and not acceptable. And then what happens if the checks stop coming? And you've got millions or tens of millions of people who no longer have a career, no longer have a skill they can use. This is a level of social dislocation that we've never seen previously. And rightfully, in this campaign, we are talking about global warming and that danger and all the dislocation that could cause. But we better start talking about automation as well, because automation is creating a problem that we just have never seen before on this scale. If it's 36 million American workers who could lose their job as early as 11 years from now, and more after that, that's something we have to prepare for. So very quickly to say this. Right now, the federal government has zero strategy for dealing with automation. There is no American policy to deal with automation. There's no plan, there's no vision, there's nothing. It's just happening. And the chips are falling where they may. And a lot of people are being horribly dislocated. I propose three things. One, stop the subsidies that are making it easier for companies to automate. Right now, hundreds of billions of dollars of tax breaks are going to companies if they choose to automate. They get rewarded with tax breaks, and they lay off American workers. It's so bad that, in fact, some companies that weren't intending to lay off anyone think that they want the tax breaks so much they go for the tax breaks and decide to lay off people they weren't even planning to originally. New York Times did an analysis of this. Eduardo Porter pointed out that this has become the ultimate perverse incentive. Our tax code is actually speeding the demise of American jobs. And it got worse in the tax bill that passed the Republican Congress with President Trump just a couple of years ago. It's actually speeding up the loss of American jobs. That's point one, get rid of those tax breaks. Point two, we need to ask of any company that automates that they pay their fair share. Right now, if a company employs a worker, that worker has a job, their family has an income, and that worker pays income tax, which allows the government to provide services to all of us. When that worker is replaced by a robot, there goes that family's income. Now you've got a family that has tremendous need and potentially nowhere to turn, and no more income tax to pay for what all we need. So I propose an idea actually Bill Gates first put out there, but I'm the first presidential candidate to say this is what we should do. It's a robot tax. It's literally a tax on companies every time they lay off a worker because of automation. They have to pay a tax, and that money is used not just for retraining, but for re-employment of that worker. Literally, the money goes into all of the types of work that we need going forward, where we can employ millions and millions of Americans. Renewable energy, recycling, environmental restoration, and think about the human service and educational areas where we need millions more people, mental health care, early child education. This is going to take an immense effort by the federal government to get this right. But if there is a robot tax, it will give us the resources, combined with getting rid of that tax break, to actually employ millions and millions of people who have lost their jobs and give them the kind of work that we really need as a country. The robot tax is not just an idea. It's actually a fact in South Korea right now, the country that uses the most robotics of any country on earth. They recognize the danger. They recognize things were getting out of hand, and they created a robot tax. It's one of the ways that we make this right. Last point, we need a federal agency. We need a federal agency that actually gets a hold of this issue, makes every company declare how many people they're going to lay off because of automation, and requires them to have a plan to either give that worker a new job or to get them to a different kind of work with the revenue we generate. This cannot be just left to the companies to decide on their own, because if that happens, millions of people are going to lose their jobs. This has to be something where the federal government plays a very, very forceful role. So I just say to everyone, I'm the first candidate to propose such an aggressive package to deal with automation. It needs to be a central message in this campaign, a central issue in this campaign. BillDeBlasio.com, you can see all the details. With that, welcome your questions.
Mayor de Blasio,
yeah.
A couple days ago, you said that if you do not make the October debates, you're going to have to reconsider continue running for presidency. Is there anything that you can do to change that, or is that like a hard deadline for you, and you're absolutely sure that you would drop out?
Well, that's the point at which I will evaluate. I think it's absolutely right to say the debates have been among the most important parts of this campaign. They've kind of been the main street of this campaign so far for all the candidates. I also say every single time, I'm not sure the debates have changed people's standings in the polls a whole lot, but they are the place where the discussion is happening. So I would have loved to have been in the September debates. But I think if I can't get into September, my goal is to get into October. We have till October 1st. I'm going to do everything I know how to get into them. We've seen candidates miss one debate and get in the next debate. I think there's time to do it. And then on October 1st, depending on where things stand, I'll make a decision.
What will you do to change to make sure you can get onto the October debate?
It's about getting the message out there, and this is an example. This automation issue is something I care about very deeply. I've been formulating a proposal now over the last weeks. Since I put it out a few days ago, people are responding to it intensely. I did something provocative. I went on to Fox, onto Tucker Carlson's show, because he is someone who's actually talked about this issue before, and even though he and I disagree on pretty much everything, he agrees it's a central issue that's not being discussed. So I went on there, and I'll tell you, I heard tremendous feedback, including from independents and Republicans who say they're just as worried about it as Democrats, and they want to hear solutions. That's the kind of thing that causes a lot of people to pay attention. And that's how you get the support that can lead to that debate stage.
You have a strong progressive record in New York City, but as you run for the White House, is it frustrating that, at least on the progressive side, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren seem to be grabbing all the energy? How do you break through that?
It's not frustrating because I have tremendous respect for both of them, honestly. I think Bernie and Elizabeth do really important work. What is true is that experience actually matters if you're trying to figure out who's going to get things done. So I admire both of them as legislators a whole lot, but I offer something different. I've actually put these ideas into action. Green New Deal, we're doing it in New York City right now on a huge scale. Health care, we're giving people direct health care if they don't have health insurance. $15 minimum wage, we did that in New York. So for me, I offer something different. I've figured out how to do these things and make them real for millions and millions of people. So the only frustration is, needing the chance more and more to get the word out. And I understand it's a very competitive dynamic and it takes a lot of resources. And my job is to find every conceivable way to get the word out. I tell you something, Granite Staters, again, they are great interviewers and they're great vetters. I really mean it. I've been so impressed as I've gone around this state. The questions people ask, the seriousness with which they take this process is amazing. They value experience. That's what I've found. When I say I've actually done these things, it matters to them. I think more and more people hear about that. I think it breaks through.
Mr. Blasio, Andrew Yang, one of his core tenets in his campaign is automation.
Yes.
What would you say to a Yang supporter or voter that you're just piggybacking off that plan? I mean, he talks about it all the time.
No, and I give him a lot of credit. And when I came into the campaign, this is very much related to the last question. I'm CEO, I'm mayor of the nation's largest city. When I came into the campaign, I talked about the things we've already done in New York. I had talked about pre-K for all and $15 minimum wage and health care for all. I mean, these are the things I thought were important to focus on, both to introduce myself, but also these are all issues that need to be front and center in this election. But I listened carefully, and I heard a lack of discussion of automation, and the only proposal was Andrew's, and I just disagree with him. So it was incumbent upon me to come up with something new. Now, if you look around, I'm the only presidential candidate offering these kind of solutions, and there's very few people anywhere in public life talking about this kind of radical approach that we need to actually address a huge, huge problem. So I would say amen that Andrew raised the issue, but I happen to disagree with his proposal. And it's time for another proposal to be put on the table. And I think as more and more people hear about this, they'll be attracted to it, because just the fact that we're giving away hundreds of billions of dollars of our tax dollars to actually put our fellow Americans out of work, I think the more people understand that, the more angry they'll get, the more change they'll demand.
Mayor de Blasio,
Yeah.
you released your automation plan this past week, but a handful of candidates released climate plans. You
Yeah.
haven't put a national level one out yet.
Correct.
Why not push that through and try to be part of the conversation?
Well,
this week?
first of all, because I thought there are a lot of good ideas out there on climate. I believe in the Green New Deal, and we're actually putting it into action in New York City. We have the toughest law literally on earth now in New York City, requiring the retrofitting of all major buildings, which is actually a huge cause of greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm very proud of the fact we're doing these things, and I'm going to be talking a lot more about it. But I'm also objective about the fact a lot of candidates were having an opportunity to put their ideas out there and get attention on them. Jay Inslee did a hell of a good job putting out important ideas. But there was not a dialogue going on automation, and it has to start now. So I had something to offer that I felt really needed to be heard. And again, a lot of people are saying, yeah, this really has to get front and center now. Any other questions? Going once. Yes?
Speaking of automation, another related transformation is going to be artificial intelligence. And one of the key components of artificial intelligence across healthcare and a variety of fields is the data of people.
Yeah.
And so it's like oil or coal, our data is going to be a raw material for artificial intelligence. What are some of your thoughts on that? Are you concerned about that? How should we be approaching that as a society?
So I want to go into that very big question with just a very different example, but it'll frame the answer. Very simple example. I, as a mayor, have experienced just the beginning of technological changes and what impact they're going to have on everyday people. And I'll use the example in transportation, what Uber and Lyft did to New York City, how totally dislocating it was to thousands and thousands of workers and their livelihoods, and how wages were reduced and families were put in a really tough situation. And why I say that in answer to your question is because Uber and Lyft made a decision to try and build up their companies without waiting for the government to come up with a strategy or a plan to regulate them. And I think that was a very immoral choice. When it comes to AI, that problem gets magnified many, many times over. So we have a situation now where not only is the data of tens of millions of people potentially going to be misused, but then the bigger impact of AI and automation, the potential massive dislocation of employment, tens of millions of people without a livelihood, huge disruption of our social fabric. The answer in all these cases is to create a regulatory approach, that we have to put the ball back in the court of the government to determine how to create fairness and transparency and balance. If you leave it just to the technology sector, we're all going to be in a very dangerous place. So what I hope happens in this election is we finally talk about the fact that all of this stuff actually requires a government vision, a national vision to protect all of us, and that begins with protecting the jobs of American workers. Thanks, everyone.